Central Intelligence opens in 1996 with an overweight young man named Robbie Werdich shown in his school's locker room at Central High. Several classmates grab Robbie while he is taking a shower, with the intention of pranking him. Meanwhile, Central High School pupils have gathered in the basketball court hall for a farewell ceremony. During the ceremony, Calvin Joyner is recognized as the best student for his remarkable achievements. Calvin then delivers a passionate speech. However, during his speech, the kids, led by Trevor Olson, carry Robbie's innocent corpse and slide him onto the slippery basketball court floor. Robbie suddenly becomes the focus of attention because he is entirely naked. The students laugh and mock Robbie, with the exception of Calvin, who expresses compassion by personally offering him his jacket to cover his body. Robbie, overcome with embarrassment, flees the scene. The scene then cuts to 2016, 20 years after the embarrassing episode. Calvin works as an accountant for a well-known corporation and is married to Maggie, his high school girlfriend. Calvin gets a notification about his school reunion while he is at work. He also receives a friend request on Facebook from someone named Bob Stone. Calvin receives a message from Bob Stone, who introduces himself as Robbie Werdich, a friend from Central High School. Robbie invites Calvin to meet in a pub. Calvin and Bob meet that evening, and Calvin is amazed to see Robbie, who was once very obese, has transformed into a man with a stout and athletic physique. The two have a dispute that ends with a fistfight at the bar, but Bob handles it well because he is now a martial arts expert. Bob then asks Calvin to let him remain at his house for the night. Calvin, being generous, allows his friend to stay at his residence. Bob arrives at Calvin's place and asks Calvin for help reviewing certain online transactions on a website. They uncover auctions and offers for bank accounts containing millions of dollars intended for the mafia and other criminal organizations. The auction for these accounts will finish in 14 hours. Calvin's laptop hangs when they try to look into the auction more. When queried about the auction site, Bob gives an evasive response, as if he is hiding something. Bob spends the night sleeping on the couch. The next day, Calvin gets ready for work while Bob is still asleep. Not long later, there comes a knock on the door, and Calvin is astonished to see several CIA officers. A female CIA agent named Pamela Harris claims they are hunting for a fugitive named Bob Stone. Calvin notifies the CIA agents that Bob is at his home. However, when the agents arrive, Bob has vanished and the room is clean. Operative Harris discloses that Bob Stone was a CIA operative who obtained information on an auction site for bank accounts worth millions of dollars, intending to sell them to the mafia. He is also suspected of murdering his companion Phil during their trip to obtain the information. Calvin, having recently discovered the truth about Bob, agrees to assist the CIA operatives in apprehending him. Agent Harris uses Calvin to entice Bob out of hiding, laying the groundwork at Calvin's office. Bob phones Calvin and invites him to meet downstairs. The CIA officers rush downstairs to apprehend Bob, but it is all Bob's plan. When the agents leave Calvin alone in his room, Bob enters and tells him he requires his assistance. Calvin, who believes Bob is a bad person, contacts the CIA. A shootout breaks out between Bob and the CIA men, but Bob and Calvin escape. To escape being pursued by the CIA, Bob claims that he is not a traitor and simply wants to apprehend the Black Badger, the culprit who murdered his partner Phil. Bob believes the Black Badger has a satellite code that allows him to access the million-dollar accounts and relies on Calvin's abilities to find him. When they stop to remove a GPS tracker from their vehicle, they are ambushed by a bounty hunter. Bob is crippled by the bounty hunter, but Calvin escapes on a motorcycle. Calvin is detained on his way home by Operative Harris, who confirms Bob's status as a defected CIA operative and speculates that Bob is the Black Badger. She instructs Calvin not to notify his wife for their own protection and hands him a tracking device connected to the CIA system. Calvin next visits Maggie for their marriage counseling appointment where he meets Bob, disguised as a consultant. After a fake therapy session, Bob persuades Calvin to assist him. Calvin arranges a meeting with Trevor Olson, who now works for an international financial firm. Olson, who used to bully Robbie, is unaffected by the new Big Robbie. After meeting Olson, Calvin is approached by Agent Harris, who threatens to jail Maggie if he does not assist in catching Bob. Calvin betrays Bob by betraying their position, resulting in his detention and transportation to a secret CIA base. Agent Harris attempts to extract information from Bob about Phil's murder of the Black Badger, but is unsuccessful. Calvin, feeling terrible for Bob, resolves to assist him escape. They apprehend numerous CIA agents and flee. Calvin enters Olsen's account and transaction codes into the CIA's tracking device, discovering that the transaction will take place at Boston's subterranean parking garage. Bob and Calvin steal a jet and travel to Boston. Bob arrives at the parking lot and asks Calvin to wait outside while he enters the meeting place alone. Agent Harris arrives, and Calvin wrongly believes she is the Black Badger, attempting to warn Bob. However, Calvin unwittingly disrupts Bob's meeting with the potential buyer, during which Bob claims to be the Black Badger. Bob shoots Calvin, grazing him on the neck. Just as Bob is about to proceed with the agreement, Phil appears, revealing himself as the true Black Badger, having faked his death. Calvin is perplexed about who the Black Badger really is. Agent Harris and armed troops ambush them, resulting in a chaotic gunfight. During the skirmish, Calvin grabs the 2 flash drives with Bob and Phil's satellite codes, but is pursued by a mobster. Bob saves Calvin before the mob boss attacks him, and Bob then murders the mob boss. Calvin escapes, but Phil pursues him, resulting in a standoff on a bridge. Phil attempts to persuade Calvin that Bob is the genuine Black Badger. Bob, feeling disapproved, begins shooting at Phil. During their struggle, Calvin shoots Bob, believing him to be the true criminal. Phil then reveals himself as the genuine Black Badger and kidnaps Calvin. Calvin frees himself by performing somersaults, while Bob murders Phil by cutting his throat and dumping him into the lake. Bob apologizes to Calvin for shooting him and explains that it was to defend him from the mafia. Calvin apologizes for not trusting Bob and believing him to be a nasty person. The scene changes to Calvin and Bob arriving at their 20th high school reunion in a CIA chopper. Agent Harris apologizes to Bob for suspecting him of being the Black Badger and asks him to return to the CIA. Calvin reconciles with Maggie and promises to restore their marriage. Calvin tells Maggie that he hacked the voting system to crown Bob Stone as prom king during the reunion. When everyone is perplexed by Bob Stone, it is revealed that he is Robbie Werdick, the obese student humiliated by Olsen and his pals 2 decades before. Trevor Olsen attempts to disgrace Bob again, but Bob, now changed, defends himself and punches Olsen. Bob delivers an inspirational speech, revealing himself to be Robbie Werdick, who is always determined to overcome problems. He compliments Calvin as a loyal buddy and recreates the awkward episode by removing his clothing. This time, everyone is in awe of his powerful physique. The film concludes with Maggie pregnant and Calvin joining the CIA. Bob picks up Calvin in a new Chevrolet Silverado and returns the jacket Calvin gave him after the unpleasant event at school. The 2 friends depart to begin their day as CIA spies.